Hi, Gina.
Brief second, I was in the waiting room and I saw the list of sponsors. That was nice.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, I'm admitting all of these people now. I'm going to unmute everybody for right now so we can say hi. And then I'll mute people when we get started with class. Good morning, folks that are joining us. Hi, Lynn Sin. I see you. Hi, Lynn. Oh, she's still connecting. And we are recording because I see the little.
Hello.
Good morning. Hi, Ken. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well.
It looks nice. It looks nice and bright where you are.
Yeah, I've got the window curtain open here. Is it too bright?
No. Looks
I
great.
can turn that light off over
No, it looks good. We can see you very well.
a little bit there. Hey, can you tell if Gloria is on there?
She is not so far.
Unless she's Galaxy S8.
Yeah, that's her.
Oh,
okay. I'll change your name. Or can you give me co-host, and I'll change your name.
Yeah, hang on a second. I forgot to do that. You are co-host right now.
Okay. Now find her and change your name.
Gloria won't have her video on. She's in the kitchen.
Okay, that's fine.
Chopping vegetables, so you'll want to keep her muted.
I'm going to mute everybody when we get started. Right now, I've got everybody unmuted just so folks can say hello. Hello, Lynn Sin. I see you.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lynn. Hi, Lynn.
Nice to see you all.
Hello.
Everybody's unmuted right now, so you guys can say hello, even the ones we can't see.
I have my coffee cup. Hey, I'm going to go get a timer so that I can maybe not go overboard this time.
You do what you need to do. We've got a few minutes. How's everybody doing?
Janice, are you there?
I am. Can you see me?
No.
This is my first time Zooming, so I'm not sure I'm doing it right.
Well, wake up your toolbar, and it should be probably at the bottom, and you've got a little camera. And if you'll click on that, we can probably see you.
I don't even know what toolbar is.
Oh, it's the
bar. Your screen.
Oh, I don't have one on my screen.
Yeah, if your screen is blank, touch your screen or move your mouse.
You all fill the screen. I don't.
Go ahead, Gina. Tell her what to do.
Are you on a tablet or a computer or phone?
I don't know. It's an iPad.
Okay. But touch the iPad screen somewhere and you should see a menu pop up around the border.
Oh, yes. Okay. And then what do I do?
Look for a camera button or video button.
Okay. Is that it?
Yeah, we can see you.
Yes, now we see you.
Now when you're
open, touch that screen again, and if you want to, you can touch the word chat, and that will open a little chat window on the side. So if you need to type something during the class, you can.
Okay. I don't do that, so I think I'll wait on that.
That's fine.
Okay, yeah. Obviously, I need to take a computer class.
Good morning, Elizabeth.
Good morning. How are you, Lynn?
Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. And I saw Janice.
Hi. How are you, Elizabeth?
I'm good. It's nice to see my friends.
Cheryl's here.
Hello.
Yay. Cheryl had a frustrating time getting connected last week.
Hey, I want to show you a sketch, Ken.
Yeah?
Good morning.
Oh, hey.
I got the idea. I got the idea from Art Outfitters.
Yeah. I've noticed that turning up in several sketches on Urban Sketch.
Get your world.
Yeah. That can be pretty important when you don't have any.
Sketch what's important to you, yeah.
When I was in the Peace Corps in Africa, we always had to use
Leah, we're getting feedback from someone, so maybe we should mute it all and then let people unmute themselves if they want to say hi.
Okay. I'm gonna unmute Kenneth. Okay, I have muted everybody, and that's not to be rude, but we're just getting some feedback. And we do want to be sure that we can hear each other. So if you see the microphone, when you move your mouse or touch your screen, you should be able to see an old-fashioned microphone symbol. We call it an icon. If it's red and has a line through it, that means we can't hear you. So if you have a question and want to be heard, just tap on your microphone and you can unmute yourself. But when we get phones ringing and dogs barking, we won't be distracted by what Ken has to say. Before we start, I just want to thank Ken again for doing this. Y'all can obviously tell a lot of work goes into these PowerPoint presentations. And for him to make these available for LifeQuest at this time is really helping keep us visible, keep us strong, keep our members engaged, and really is doing a tremendous service for our organization. And we really send you applaud. If you know how to do a little applaud, put under reactions on your toolbar, give Ken a little applaud. Do you see my hand in front of my face there? Janet did it.
I like it better when I just see them clapping. I don't think we should tell them how to do the applause with the icons. I just like seeing them all do it excitedly.
Well, either way, thank you so much, Ken, from the bottom of our hearts. We appreciate you. We have 19 participants. That's awesome.
Okay. Just so you know, in sign language, when you put both hands up, this is how deaf people applaud.
Yay! So we appreciate that. And Ken, my sister from Germany, is tuning in on the website.
Oh, wow.
When after we're asleep, she's able to get on there and see the your presentation. So she appreciates that too.
Oh.
Before we start, does anybody have any questions about Zoom, about how to speak or write a question or raise your hand? If you unmute your microphone, we can help you with some of those little procedural things before we get started in the class.
Yeah, this is Gloria.
Hi, Gloria.
Hi. This is the first time I've used a phone with Zoom, and I don't know how to get to a gallery on a phone.
Oh, hang on.
Just keep swiping. I think you'll see in a minute. When Ken starts to give his presentation, his will be the main screen.
Okay, and then I just swipe and I can see other people. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Annette. Can you hear me?
Hi, Annette. Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Ken. When you talk about using white gouache. Okay, I have some tubes of acrylic gouache. That's not the same thing though, right?
It's not exactly the same thing because acrylic gouache would probably, once it dried, you couldn't take it off. Regular gouache is water-based and you could wipe it off right down to bare paper if you wanted.
Okay, all right. That's what I needed to know. I'm going through old supplies.
Yeah.
Janet has a question.
Janet has a question. Thank you for raising your electronic hand.
Right. How do you write the question? That was never clear to me. If you wish to cover it at the end of the class, that's fine. I can wait to learn that. It never was clear to me.
Gina, do you want to handle that?
Sure. If you wake up your screen and you see a chat button, that will, if you open that, a chat window will appear on the side and you can type a question there. It will say to everyone and everyone can see your question, or if you have a question for someone in particular, there's a little drop down arrow next to that and you can pick a person, like passing notes in class, and just send a note to someone in particular that way.
I just now found it. Thank you. And I
Good.
followed
Okay.
as you were instructing. Thank you.
It
Good.
looks like
Okay.
it looks like a speech bubble. Yeah, it is like passing notes in class, but you can make a question open to anyone, and Gina can be monitoring those. Gina, are you planning to stick around the whole time, or you are? Okay. All right, we have 24 participants, Ken. So without, and Ken, we're not glued in to your ending time. We do have another class that starts at 11, but so you can go, a little bit close to that. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. So I'm going to hush and turn it over to Ken.
Okay. Let's see if I can do anything. First, I got to do a share screen thing here. Get that going. Share. Okay. Everybody can see my screen. And I'm going to make it larger now. That didn't quite do what I wanted. Okay. Problem is, well, that's probably full screen. Okay, we'll go with this. I'm doing it a little differently today. Instead of using PowerPoint, I've prepared a PDF, and using the PDF, which you probably can't tell the difference, but I tried to transfer. It's a file thing, and it lost all my pictures when I tried to put it into Open Office, so I found other ways to do things. I'll be doing things a little bit differently after May 5th because I'm supposed to get a brand new camera. I think I'm muted. Can anybody hear me? There. Okay, I'm okay. Okay, we're going to talk about vegetation today. We've already mentioned we've got 4 main things. Today I'm going to cover vegetation, trees and grasses. That's the main thing we're going to talk about, and how to use them in your compositions. I never really paint or draw a tree or anything just exactly as it is unless I've got a really good reason to. I mostly use them in my compositions to make my pictures enhance the compositional value of the picture. Just some examples. This first one here of this church, the actual view when you saw that church was against a solid background of gray trees, and I didn't like that. And there was lots of orange trees in the area, so I put that row of orange trees back there so that it would complement the green roof of the building. So it's one of the many things you can do like that. Here's some good books in my classes. I usually bring in books I think that are particularly good, ones that I've got a lot of use out of. These 2 here, Drawing Scenery by Jack Ham. It's an older book. It's about 1960s, I guess, now. And especially, well, this one probably doesn't have a lot of people in it, but a lot of his styles and fashions are pretty out of date. But his scenery, and just generally drawing landscape ideas are very good and very easy to use and practical, and very professional too. The J.D. Harding book is just great. It was written in the 1850s, 1860s. He was a drawing master. He used to teach a lot of wealthy people how to draw and things like that. His tree drawings are so inspiring. You just have to see them. He writes very tediously. He has the worst way of explaining anything, but if you can wade through it all, you really get a lot of valuable information. So it's a book worth looking at, I think. I love it. I love to draw pictures from it just to practice. So beginnings, you may not want to draw everything, an entire tree to begin with, especially on a large scale. They might just want to start with portions of things. Mushrooms are great. I like to do mushrooms. There's so many different kinds and lots of colors. And they're an easy thing to watercolor because they're not terribly large, so you don't have to worry about messing up washes and things like that. So they're great from that aspect too. It's good to do lots of pencil sketches, pen and ink sketches. Those lower 2 grasses and that oak leaf are ink. And those upper 2 seed pod pictures are pencil. And So again, it's a good way to start out, is just kind of inch your way in there. I think the first thing I ever drew was an acorn, and that was as far as vegetation went. That was big enough for me. I had problems with that. So I'll go on. We're going to get into some basics now. And gee, my picture of you all has just covered up a lot of what I want to see. I'm just wondering if I can hide this thumbnail down a bit. There, that did it. Okay. Now, to begin with, we're going to talk a little about sketching here. Begin with the tree trunk, and you'll notice I'll put a heavy line on the shadow side of the tree and a broken line on the sunny side. And that's just the general way of indicating bright sun when you're only using a pencil and line to work with. The line's very expressive, and I've done some classes just on various lines that you can do. Bark, you know, you look at that and it looks very complicated and you think, oh, I don't want to draw bark. But it's a very suggestive thing, and a few random lines up and down, as you'll see later, pretty well cover all you need to know about bark. Here's a couple of examples here. Shading, usually use what's called bracelet shading, especially on a curved thing like this, where you're just kind of making little curved loops on the shadow side of things. The best way of thinking about shading on a tree and tree limbs is think of each limb and the trunk and everything as a slinky. You've seen those slinky toys. If you stretch those out and you turn them the direction the limb is going, that's exactly how you should do your shading direction. As you can see there on that picture of that middle tree with the branches coming out every direction, the direction of the curves change at eye level. Now, I made this, you know, pretty exaggerated, so it makes the whole trunk look like it's bending backwards. But basically, below eye level, you get curves that curve up like that. You might think of that as the smiling direction. And above eye level, you get a frowny smile, a frowny face, as all the curves go downwards. And that's one way of keeping that straight. Sometimes you'll want to do curves all the way up, and that's really not how these are, because you're actually looking at an ellipse from underneath as you look above your eye level, and you're looking down at ellipse. Like, think of looking down at a glass of water when you're below eye level, and so obviously you can only see the rim that's closest to you, and so you'll get that curve down like that. So a good thing to remember, and a good way to do that. Now I'm gonna try and show you an example of that right now. I am going to exit my screen share here. Stop share. And can I see myself again? Here's myself close enough. Okay. Here's an example that I did just right quickly. I'm going to see how these examples work. But this was done in pen and ink. And you can see how I've used those bracelet lines. I've also used a lot of other textural lines on this thing. But I've got lines here. See, these are very gently curving up, and these up here would be curving down. That was a real quick thing I did. By the way, I'll mention this while I'm talking about this page. You might make you a little sketchbook. This is just printer paper, and you know, cheap printer papers you can get. You can take it to Office Depot or anywhere, and they can put a little plastic binding on it for you. And I used some old hardback cardboard, and take that with them too. Have it cut to size, and then you got a really cheap sketchbook that you're not worried about messing up. And so you can just try out all kinds of things. See, like this thing here, you know, a little bit of watercolor put on that. You know this kind of paper is not going to make you a beautiful watercolor, so you're more inclined to experiment and try things out that you might not otherwise do. I like having that around. Now I'm going to share my screen again. Ooh, there we go. Share. Sorry, that takes a bit of while. Okay, and down there on the bottom now, let's talk a little bit about canopies, and I'll show you a lot of examples of this. But shading is going to be on the underneath sides of the tree foliage. And generally they're in kind of separate little foliage blocks, you might say. I've got one on that upper one up there. You'll find a lot of the branches will be all in shade, very dark shade sometimes. There may be patches of sunlight on them, but generally I'll put at least some shade on my branches underneath there to show that. It's going to be heaviest in the bottom layers of the tree because you've got all those leaves blocking the sun. And so as you progress down the tree, the shading is going to get darker and darker, and less shadow up in the top of the tree and towards the light. So a thing to remember, and I'll probably reinforce, is when you're shading a tree, it's going to be lightest at the top, darkest at the bottom, and it's going to be lightest toward the light and darkest as you get away from the source of light. So you got two gradations going on there, much like the sky we talked about last time. Okay, leaf shading, and this emphasizes it. By the way, these 4 pictures over on your right came out of that J.D. Harding book, the Victorian one I talked about. As you can see, he's just very, very good with a pencil, drawing trees and things. But you can look at those and you can tell they shade from top to bottom. It gets darker and darker on the foliage, and it shades from left to right as you go down the tree. He's, except for maybe that first one, it looks like it's more shading right to left. But usually he puts, and maybe I guess the one below too, he varies it. Me being a science illustrator, I almost always put the light to the upper left. That's just one of the things we do. So I get in the habit of that. Those are a couple of mine over to the left, and you can see how those get shaded like that. There again, light direction. These are some examples of the 6B pencils. The softer pencils will add a lot of texture on most sketch paper. And that's very useful to have those flecks of light coming through there on that. The soft pencils really do smear though, and you've either got to use something to fix it, a fixative. I've heard you can use hairspray. You know, I tried that once and it didn't do much, and it turned the paper yellow. So I'm not too sure that's the best idea, but it probably did keep it from smearing if you used enough of it. I would think it's some of it has some sort of varnish or shellac in it. Probably work well. Shading, again, that heavy line on your shade side is a good way to start. Broken line on the sunny side. You're going to put heavier shading at that very edge and work your way around to the middle. Of course, that all depends on the light. You may have a light source straight in front of you where you might have dark on both sides and shade it just like any other cylinder when you do that. I don't like to draw my trees that way. I like to have more of a directional lighting on it. Here, this tree also in the center shows how to use shrubberies. You can use that dark shrub against the light side of the tree, and so that the actual line of the tree disappears, and it's really made from the shrub behind it. Also, on the other side, the shrub can merge directly into the tree, so you'd have a lost line there completely. And it adds depth to it when you do that. Always anchor your trees to the ground. You know, you don't want them to look like they're floating away necessarily. So use some grasses in front of them, shadow line, shade, even just a little bit like the little quickie sketch on the right. You can see I've grounded it a little bit by putting a few grass strokes and things like that. The side of a 6B pencil, if you're doing a tree in winter, you can see how I've laid that pencil on its side and just kind of lightly scrubbed across the top of the branches. And that gives you the effect of twigs. And we'll look at that in watercolor too. We can do that. Another problem I see a lot of people do is they make their lower part of their trees get too large too quickly. Don't do like on the right there where you got this giant trunk. Unless it's a cypress tree, it's probably not going to look anything like that. Another thing is try and put cool colors of grass colors and even soil colors and everything on your shady side of your trunk, and warmer colors on the sunny side, and that will emphasize the light direction and also give you more interesting, complex colors in what you're doing. Another good way to get branches and make random branches is to twirl your pencil as you draw a branch from the base of the tree out toward the tips of the branches. If you just kind of roll it in your fingers and let it kind of go where it wants, you'll get a lot of random action. And that works really well with a chisel-shaped pencil. If you're doing broadside pencil strokes, I don't know if you all work with pencils, but whether you're using colored pencil or a graphite, if you will take your pencil after it's sharpened and rub it on a piece of sandpaper till you've flattened one edge like a slope, like a chisel, and draw with that, you can get some very nice effects. And it used to be called broad stroke pencil work or pencil painting, and works really well if you're using graphite particularly, or colored pencils. I like to do it with that too. Let's see here. Some texture in our trees. This pine tree over here, I did that broad stroke. You can see those wide pencil strokes there. I used this in one of the books I was illustrating, and so I put it in the computer and very slightly tinted it green. You can hardly tell it except for one little spot down there at the bottom where I don't know why it's so much green. But generally that's just a graphite drawing. The trees on the right, I used a Waterbrush that I'd cut up a bit and made an angle on to get all that texture in it. Those colors are colors that people don't often use to paint trees, but I like them. You can mix Payne's gray with quinacridone gold to get really interesting greens. And also ultramarine and light red makes a very interesting combination for shadows. Light red is pretty much like a very red burnt sienna. If you're wondering what that is, you can get that color from Winsor Newton. And also, I think Daniel Smith has something very similar to I think it's called English red at Daniel Smith. Okay. Texture with bark, colored pencil. I really like doing this. David Cook showed me how to do this, and I just really like doing it because I like to use a lot of colors, like you can see in that tree picture there. And the colored pencil is there used in bark texture. I've used reds and blues and yellows, maybe a little whites in there too, to really enhance texture. But also, if you like lots of colors, you know, it's great. All your trees do not have to be realistic looking. You can really intensify the color throughout, have a nice painting as a result. Obviously, those shadows there are not that blue in real life or anything like that. But I like to intensify my colors and just make it look more interesting that way to my eye. And you have to do. Here is watercolor pencil. I've used watercolor on the main trunks, and then all of the small branches are done in watercolor pencil. You could do the same thing with a rigger brush, but it's just quicker and easier with the pencil, and really a lot of times you'll get a better effect than if you were to use the rigger or the liner brush. It gives you a different effect with liner brushes. Usually your limbs are much smoother, more curved, and on an oak tree, that's really not what they look like. They're really very zigzaggy and jagged and things like that, and that's true on a lot of trees. You can see that curve on the lower bottom right. That's made with a paintbrush, and with a pencil, I wouldn't have necessarily done that. So it kind of what tools you use do make a difference at a lot of times. I took after I had finished drawing those branches, I took a wet brush and very lightly smeared it across the tops of those branches to get the twig effect that you would with watercolor if you just used a light wash of watercolor on it. So there is that too. This big old tree here, you'll see it's not grounded. It's not anything. The first one is graphite, and I did this tree because I was using it, making a book on goat production. And I used a lot of elements like this. I guess this may be why I teach the class this way, is in using particular elements rather than doing a whole landscape, is I would make this tree and then I would use it in all kinds of different paintings by inserting it in Photoshop. I would make a transparent background. One thing you'll see on this graphite tree are a lot heavier lines in places than I might normally use it. It's really noticeable kind of on that colored side over there. Also, you won't find any broken line on this tree if I could help it, because when I try and make the tree transparent, any broken line would affect what was inside of that area that it was broken into. So I had to make sure everything was connected. You don't have to do that these days, but when I started doing this, things weren't quite as worked out as they are now, and a lot harder to do in many ways. I used the graphite as the grisaille and then color penciled over the top for that picture to the right of it. And then once I had color on that, I could put it into a Photoshop and I could change that color, and I used it for autumn colors and a lot of other things. I'll show you a quick picture of some of the things I did with that. There we go. Where's my picture there? Okay, here's that book I did. And there you can see that big tree right here. It's just colored the same as a tree would be. In fact, this whole thing is one picture, front and back. Goats, lots of goats. I've done a lot of goats in my life. This particular picture, in fact, all of the pictures in these books and things that I did, I put it all together, a piece at a time. I made a blue sky. Most of them been individual trees, and I just varied their sizes and shrunk them down. And the same with the goats. I used the goats throughout the book. Just to give you an idea on that tree, here's that same tree in a different context, right there with some goats hanging out under it. And then here's the same tree reduced in size, and all of a sudden it's autumn. Hey. That was one way of saving me a lot of time and saving the university a lot of cost. So how that works. Let me go back to my share screen. All righty, there we go. But I just wanted to mention why that is like it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, here's another way of doing tree studies. This is in the style of Caspar David Friedrich from the 1800s. This has a burnt sienna background. I just washed over the whole page. I didn't have any toned paper of that color at the time. Then he begins with a very light sepia washes and does the entire tree in sepia washes. And then after that's dried and he has this tones the way he wants, he adds all the detail with graphite pencil. And it's a really fun thing to do, and you can get some really nice pictures that way if you ever want to give it a try doing trees that way. Here are some useful brushes that I find when I'm doing trees, and I'll show you some examples. There's the hog bristle flat brush. I use that more than anything. The stencil brush, that little deer foot one, is just a round stencil that's cut at an angle. It's really useful for especially making pine trees. They're kind of in a ball when you start looking at those trees up there, and you can really work with that quickly. And there's one of my old water brushes that I've cut at an angle. It gets a lot of texture as well. And see, there's a flat brush. You can do crepe myrtle, things like that. You'll see a lot of young trees that come up like that, look like that. That's pretty characteristic. Works well with a flat brush to just kind of daub it down. You have to use your paint very dryly. Just dampen the watercolor paint and just put your brush right into it really thick. Smash it around a bit vertically onto some paper till it looks about right, and then do it. If you got too much water on it, all you'll get are puddles of water and you won't get all that texture. See, there's the stencil brush, making a little pine tree branch. You just daubing that around. I varied the color. I've started out with a sap green and finished up with purulene green for the shadow area. And there is with the water brush. See, lots of rough kind of texture. Makes the tree a little more interesting to my eye to do that. Here are the greens I like to use. These are convenience. You could mix all of your greens, but especially when I'm out sketching, I don't want to spend a lot of time mixing a lot of paint when I can just add one color to another real quickly and get what I want. Sap green is probably the one I go to most. Very useful color. I'm also using a lot of the deep sap green. It makes a nice shadow color under the sap. And so does the purulane green, which is a bit darker and a bit bluer. And all three of those are my favorite colors for that. Phthalo green is a dangerous color to me. It just stains everything, gets on everything, a little bit goes too far. Viridian is almost the same color, but a lot weaker and a lot easier to handle, I think. The only drawback to Viridian, I feel like, is when you squirt it out of a tube into a pan, over time it can get a little gritty and dried. But probably if you use some M-gram paint, it would never do that. The undersea green is actually a premix of quinacridone gold and ultramarine. And it really granulates out nicely. It's kind of a dark dull green. And I've got it. I don't use it very much. I should use it more, but I don't. If I want other colors, I'll mix them, as I'll show you later. Hooker's green is another good green. I just love Hooker's green. It's just a beautiful green color to me, but it doesn't do much for the vegetation around here. I'm looking out my window right now, and everything is yellow-green. It's sap green or even more yellow, actually, this time of year. So there's a mixed green chart. We've looked at this in my class last time, for those of you in my class. But this just shows you all the greens you can mix just by adding a little bit of another color that you probably already have into your various greens that you might keep on your palette. And the ones with the check marks are the ones that I use the most frequently, that really, to me, are different enough that they're really useful. Like Hansa Yellow Medium over there with Phthalo Green, which I rarely use, but it sure makes a good spring green. This time of year, that's a great green to use on a lot of trees. Generally, with any green, if you'll put a touch of red into it, it'll dull it down just a little and it'll look more natural if you're trying for a natural look. So that's something to keep in mind. And good gray greens, purulane green mixed with permanent alizarin crimson in kind of a weak wash will give you a really good gray green, which is very useful. Kind of looks like the old Terra Verte pigment, only actually a lot easier to use. Terra Verte never did mix too well to me. Well, this is something that a lot of people don't think about when they paint plants. And so when they paint a plant, a lot of times, all they do is paint it green. They might put a shadow on it, but there's a lot more going on. And if you just think about this, it'll help you when you do paint plants. Think of transmitted light, like a stained glass window. The sun's going right through the leaf. It will be, much more yellow almost than green. And I've exaggerated it here to really show that effect at number 1 up there. Number 2 is the leaves in shadow facing down. They're going to be darker green. You can see under there, it's going to be the truest green a lot of times of what you see. Leaves in shadow facing up are catching a lot of skylight. And so they're going to be bluer. That would be down there at number 3. And they're going to have a little bit more blue into them and a lot less yellow as far as the green goes. Number 4, sunlight reflecting off the leaf. That can be almost pure white, but very definitely it's going to be the palest green on your plant. And then down there, like number 5 in the back and down on the bottom of the plant, you're going to have your deepest shadow, and you're going to have the deepest blue-greens in the color. Now, actually on that plant, I drew that plant fairly accurately. It was growing against a fence on my morning walk. And I photographed it and I brought it home and I sketched. But if you'll notice there at number 5 how dark those leaves are, I did that on purpose so that it would really make that light reflected leaf in front of it stand out. Contrast is so important in anything you draw. It's just much more important than color. And so you really need to use your tonal contrast to make sure you've got a wide range on your paintings and sketches. here's some real life examples. Here's a sidelit tree, and notice that a lot of transmitted light there on the side where it's the light striking it, how the shadow grades from left to right across the tree. Now this one, it seems to me, is darker at the top than the bottom, and I think that's because the sun is really low. This is early in the morning. You can see those long shadows. And so the sun is actually hitting it down there on that lower part more than the upper part yet. But as the day progresses, that will change. And the lower parts of that tree will have a lot more shadow in them. Here's another good one showing transmitted light. You can see how yellow those leaves are on the sunny side of that tree and how it shades over into shadow on the other side. Also, look at those grasses and colors and shadow shapes on the ground. It's not solid green. We have a lot of color in there, and you need to think about that when you make a grassy green yard or anything like that. Add other colors. I like to start with wet and wet, maybe strokes of quinacridone gold and sap green, and you'll want to use darker blue greens in the background and warm them up towards the foreground to help show the distance and depth and perspective in your painting. Also, look how soft those shadow edges are. You want to think about that when you're doing your trees, and if you're doing watercolor, you may even want to put that shadow in while everything is still wet, so those edges will kind of fuzz out and not be so hard. Or you can go back in later and just take a brush and scrub them down a little bit a lot of times, and that will take the hard edge off of them. Here's a painting by James Gurney, one of my favorite illustrators right now, and showing backlit leaves. And he did this one just to show that. And you'll notice the leaves on those maple trees on the left side are very bright and yellow, and they fade towards green toward the center as they become more duller and cooler in color. And notice the contrast of the background, how brilliantly blue the background is, complements those yellow and orange leaves in the tree, and also the tonal contrast really makes those trees pop out. If that were a very neutral tonality there, maybe just sort of a mid-green or something like that, those leaves, those trees wouldn't stand out nearly as well. So it's something to keep in mind, is really use the background colors. They don't have to be exactly what you see. You can manipulate that to really make your trees stand out. Front-lit trees. This is why you don't want to paint a lot of front-lit subjects. See how boring and flat that is? Not much going on in it. One thing you do need to notice is that the edges of any of your trees, if you'll really put a little bit of detail in the edges, everything else will look like it. The edges are very important. If you make them smooth and round, it'll look like you have no detail. So, put a little bit of leaf things there along the edge. You can see the top edge of that tree, just some daubs of the tip of your brush. It doesn't have to look like leaves at all. In fact, those don't. They look like you used a hog bristle brush on them up there and just jabbed it around with some dry paint. The bird holes are not always in trees, especially here in Arkansas. We have some dense trees. So sometimes if you want them, you just have to put them in there. They're not usually there all the time. And there's some silhouetted trees. They're going to be really dark. I wouldn't use black, but a really dark green, a purulene green or something like that works well. If you really want to get them dark, you can mix some violet or purple in with that purulene green and get nearly a black. That is really a nice color to use. Also, notice our sky gradient there. It's top to bottom. We've got more blue at the top, and it fades as we go down to the horizon. And then it's also, the sunlight is over to your right, and you can see it's much lighter over there than it is on the left side of the screen, going away from the sunlight. So you have those two gradients going on like we talked about. We use trees for contrast. Like I say, I manipulate my trees to do what needs to be done. Here's a natural example. You get this very light tree against a black roof. And so both of them really stand out, again, because we have a lot of contrast. And generally, it's the opposite way. You're going to have a light roof and maybe darker trees like I did in this picture from Devil's Den at a cabin we were staying at. And you don't have to paint every tree. Notice I left those 3 trees white. Sometimes it just looks better to me to do that, and so I don't always paint everything. I think if I had painted those particularly dark, they would have just sort of gotten in the way or would not have stood out. I don't know, something told me not to paint them, so I didn't. And here's a way of using your vegetation as a framing device. This is a quick little barn I did. It's probably on 3x5 postcard or something, not a large painting at all. But if you look at the barn door, how I've used very light foliage to contrast against the dark interior, and used darker trees up along the back. I could have even went darker, really, along the top roof line of the barn. And the whole thing makes a frame around the barn. But notice I didn't enclose the barn entirely. It would look trapped if you did that and compressed and oppressive looking. You always want to leave some space for your buildings or animals or whatever you're doing to stick out so that they're not trapped in your painting. Shadows underneath foliage, like we showed in those Harding drawings. There's another picture down there in the corner showing that, but this is looking up at a tree on my morning walk again. And you can really see those dark shadows on the underneath and back sides of the tree and the foliage. And look how light it gets on the top edge up there. And again, you can exaggerate that with yellows, greens, blues, violets, any color you want to do on that. The tree trunks themselves show up very light against that shadowed foliage. And so you would want to make sure you left that. You can go in with the gel pen and do a lot of that, or again, white gouache. You could tone that gouache with a little bit of gray if you wanted to. It's pretty hard to make those limbs show up if you're trying to make them blacker than that shadow is. There just wouldn't be enough tone contrast. Also, look at those trimmed shrubberies down below. Look how they fade from yellow at the top and they get greener as you go down to the bottom and then with the shadow. Again, we can emphasize that in our sketches too. And here's some examples of doing that with some cedars. Again, look at that grass. There are lots of colors in the grass, very soft shadows. Notice how in this I've intensified and exaggerated shadow color. I like to do that because I like pretty colors. And a simple sky, you can see that sky took about 5 seconds to make. And it's, you know, for a little sketch, it's fine for me. I like the color in it. I picked up colors that I've used in the ground too. I've got some yellows there, some turquoise, and on top of that, I think I used cobalt blue for that. Maybe even a little cerulean stuck in. I use a lot of colors. Notice how I've warmed up the left sides of those shrubberies and cooled down the right sides so that we get that sun gradient in it, and it's darker from top to bottom. It gets darker down there. I added a little texture on that left-hand cedar bush with colored pencil. You might not be able to see that terribly well, but that's always a useful thing to do. And again, it's just quicker than using a rigger brush. You might be able to do the same thing, although that was so small, I doubt you really could very well. That's a spot where a watercolor pencil really works great. Some more painting tips. This is a quick tree using 3 colors, a light undercoat. You let that dry a bit, and then we'll go back in with a few darker, more mid-tone greens, and then back with the shadow colors of probably purulene green and ultramarine blue in this picture. These are all on your handouts, by the way. I've given you 2 sets of handouts. The first set includes stuff I've written and diagrammed that are in this slide presentation. And the second set are about 5 different pages worth of tree silhouettes and also outlines. that you can look at from a book by Jack Ham, and also a book by Picard is the man's name. And the silhouettes you can print off and you can just paint them in, not the silhouettes, but the outline drawings, and give you a lot of quick practice and show you a lot of different tree shapes. So I thought you might enjoy doing those. It'll save you a lot of time drawing trees. And you know, even if you print it on your printer and the ink runs as you paint, it really doesn't matter because you've got that little bit of outline to work with. You just paint right over it, right on the printer paper, and not worry about making mistakes and things like that as you practice. Again, here's a good example of the light on the tree, how I'd paint a simple tree up there. You see lots of yellow in the top, and it grades down to blue at the bottom, using quinacridone gold, sap green, purulene, and ultramarine blue. Those are my 4 favorite tree colors for things like that. The tree on the right's got some sky holes. Again, the same color pattern on that. Just quick drawing in there. The tree on the lower left is about as quick as you can do with 3 washes. I just painted that in. I painted the trunk last, actually. Some people would prefer to paint the trunks first. Others prefer to do the foliage first. And really, it doesn't matter a whole lot as long as you make sure when you're doing your tree trunks that limbs connect. If you're making a large trunk and it jogs over to the side as you go through the foliage, you know something doesn't look right. And so you have to watch for that. Again, on tree trunks too, I'll warm up the sunny side with a little quinacridone gold. Use a lot of counter shading there, or really intensify the darks in the foliage behind the tree trunk on that left side. The cloud also adds depth to it and gives me more contrast on the shadow side of the trunk above the tree line there. Also, if you're doing bark texture, don't do it consistently over the entire trunk. On the light side of the tree, just barely hint at any kind of bark texture. You want most of the texture down the center line of the tree, as I'll show you. Again, anchor that tree to the ground. Use your grasses and things. Another quick one on this I wanted to talk about was adding color to your tree leaves. Notice that burnt sienna in there. You can use light red. You can use oranges. Anything to give you a nice complement with the green. Red and green are complementary colors. And so by adding a little into that, it really perks up the whole tree picture. And I really like that little tree there. It's nice, soft colors, and it's all blended in, very simple. The tree on the right side there, that was just showing how you'd use a rigger brush or liner to make those winter twigs around the top. You just kind of get your brush damp with paint in a fairly weak solution of it. And then wipe it off on a towel so it's not too wet, and then just sort of lay it flat and dance it around the top in a irregular manner as you go around the top edge of your branches to get that sort of effect. Oh, I heard my bell go off. Here are sponge trees. They are really good too. As you can see, just cut you an old kitchen sponge. Those yellow cellulose, I believe they're cellulose, they're synthetic, certainly. Sponges work really well for that. You can cut irregular shapes, or you can just wad your sponge up and dab it around. But you can get some real nice trees that way. I like doing that. Hillsides, follow the hillsides. You're going to have to alternate light and dark to show those ridges of trees. Generally, the tops of the trees, the very tops are going to be lightest. And as they progress down, again, they're going to be darker, and you can work your lines that way. Be honest, for some reason, I almost did this opposite in a lot of spots, but it worked. And there we have trees on a mountainside sloping down to the river because of that. Grasses, quickly, I've written out directions on how to do grasses. It's a lot like doing animal fur. In fact, you can do both the same way in a lot of ways. The main thing I would do, I start with a base layer of watercolor paint, just of whatever the color your grass basically is going to be. I use a little quinacridone gold there and just made a swipe across. And then with a rigger brush, I put in the main color of the grass blades and everything. Sometimes I vary the intensity a little. You want your strokes to all curve basically the same direction because the wind will have blown those grass leaves that way, but you want to also at the same time cross some in a crisscross manner so that your bottom edge of your grasses will have little white negative space points going up into it. I tried to really emphasize that on this one with some white gel pen. I'm not sure that was successful, but that's the idea on that. And to have it in your irregular bottom, you don't want it straight across usually. You can just make row upon row of this and mix them together where you got a giant field of tall grass, but generally you don't want to do that much detail that deep. You can use some burnt siennas and reds to add in extra different kinds of grass and plants, and you can just make these up, or it's better to go out and actually look at grass and learn to paint some kind of, at least so they sort of resemble it. Also, don't forget to put shadow color in the base of the grass. On this one, I used, I think, some dioxazine purple and also some raw umber to give me a nice shadow colors at the base of the grass. And you want to do this whether the grass is dead like this or green. Here it is in the distance. Y'all in my classes have seen the old buffaloes before here. But in the distance, notice I varied the colors of the grass all throughout. I've added, in this case, probably some raw umbers out through there, shadows of tufts of grass, not too many. You can overdo it very easily. But you don't want to get a lot of detail past your foreground. You start getting past that with detail, you're drawing the eye where you generally don't want it to be. So watch it and don't make too much grass, as fun as it is to go back and forth with those brush strokes. Green grass, I always try and tend to get my backgrounds, have that grass get bluer as you go back and more yellow as you come toward the foreground. I think you can see it in this picture fairly well. And again, just sort of indicate some tufts of grass in the background. Don't draw every blade of grass that you see. And I followed the same procedure here. I used some white gouache and put in a few white flowers on this, just for variety. And I've added some warmer colors into the greens and the purples of the grass, because sometimes there's dead grass in there or different species and things. And it warms up the foreground when you do that too. So always good to do that, change it around. Here is making texture. I scrubbed my palm of my hand and my fingers in that paint, rubbed it all around, used the end of my paintbrush and scraped out a lot of things. This was in David Cook's class, and we were having lots of fun scraping and making a lot of texture in this foreground of this Homer Winslow painting. I added a lot of red and a lot of blue that really wasn't there, but I like lots of color. So there it is. You can just hint at vegetation. These two bird pictures, you see that top bird? I just made something sort of leafy looking and varied my colors so some of the leaves are in shade and some of the leaves are in light. And usually you use it to enhance your bird. I wanted that green there because that bird had an orange breast and it would be a good complement color. Notice how I let its head escape so it wasn't trapped in the foliage. I think that's important. And the same with that robin on the right. I let its head beak kind of poke out of that little square of background that I drew. That's a nice compositional device you can do, is you can make any shape you want there that actually enhances your main subject. I put in some spring beauty flowers down there, but I think what really made that picture was the square of just background color I put in there, which, you know, it's supposed to indicate vegetation of some kind, but I didn't try to make leaves or anything like that. I am about to wrap this up. We're going to talk color and shadows. You see there's lots of color in that line of shrubs. And I've got two pages here. These are on the handouts. You can go through these instructions and try some of this out. This is some, again, my growing a wash paintings where you just start on one side and start putting in colors. Do work from the back to the front, and let those background row of trees dry before you put in the foreground shrubbery, where they'll all blend together. You can see I've used lots of intense color on this one for fall. That tree on the right was made with a bristle brush. To me, it's kind of boring. I didn't put enough variety of shape in that tree. Bothers me, but there it is. It was a quick demonstration that I was doing when that happened. And here is trees and fog, demonstrating how they change color. In the midground, they're going to be kind of a greeny black color, and as you get farther away, you're going to get blue, purple, grays, things like that. And again, these are in the handouts, and you can read over these and work through them if it's something you think you might like to give a try. So keep on sketching. Concentrate on landscape elements. Again, I do the elements and then added them all together when I was working. And that's one reason I teach like this. But when you're doing a landscape, of course, you're going to add everything together. Next week, we're going to do rocks and mountains and water, and probably try and cover all of those in the next 40 minutes. So I'm going to stop this, and anybody with questions, certainly ask me questions. Janice. Ooh.
Janice, do you have a question? You can unmute your mic by clicking the microphone.
I can't hear you.
Okay. No, I wasn't a question. That, thank you. Clapping.
Oh, clapping. Thank you.
Janet,
Okay.
Janet has a question.
Yes, please.
Where again